Alright, the last thing we're going to talk about on today's notes is word problems. So, there are kind of some general steps to word problems that we're going to kind of talk through really quick here. So, the first thing you should always do when you're looking at a word problem is A, not get scared. Just read through it. Read through and try to understand what's happening. If there are words in there that you don't know, mark them so that you can figure out what they are. You can ask me, or you can look them up on your phone or at home on the computer. The next thing is to question. Decide what the question is asking for. Look for the unknowns. Typically, they ask the question at the end of the word problem. Then reread the problem. You should always be reading a word problem at least 3 times. Pre-read it, read it and start labeling things, and then you're going to read it again to make sure you answer the question. So, see if you can write the unknown as a variable. Label things, draw a picture, write relevant formulas, things like that. You can always say it. Sometimes it's just translating into English into an algebraic equation. So that's number 5, translate. You're going to solve the equation. So you're trying to make an equation and solve it. And this is probably one of the most important things. Always look back at the problem and see if you answered the question. Okay, you have to interpret the values for each variable. So again, you should always be reading your word problem at least 3 times. Pre-read it, read it for understanding to write equations, and then reread it to see if you actually answered the question. Okay, you can actually test word problems. You can kind of see if it makes sense, the answers you got. Pick some values and see if they're going to work in the equation you picked. And then finally, you're going to write and identify the answer. And when you're writing and identifying the answer, please remember that context problems deserve context solutions. So that's a fancy way of saying that a word problem deserves an answer that's a sentence. Okay, you're given sentence in the word problems, you should end with a sentence as your final answer. Tell it what it's about. So over here on these bottom problems, it says solve the word problem. You must define a variable, set up an equation, solve, and interpret your answer. So those are the 4 things we're going to do. So starting here at number 1, it says 1/8 of a number increased by 20 is 32. Find the number. So it's a fairly short word problem. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to define our variable. So in this case, it usually comes from what they're asking us to do. If you look back at this problem, they are asking us to find the number. So that's what we don't know. We don't know our number. So our variable is going to be nx, any letter you want. It doesn't tell you what letter to pick. So I'm going to pick x. So x is going to be the number I'm trying to find. Okay. Now step 2 is to write and solve an equation. Okay, there are times that these word problems are fairly simple and you could probably just guess and check. However, that's not what I want you to do. I want you to learn to set up these equations. Okay, because there's going to come a time that you can't just guess and check and you've got to be able to set up the equation. So here, 1/8 of, so that means 1/8 times, so 1/8 times, so we're multiplying it by something, 1/8 of a number. So in this case, we don't really need parentheses. We can just put 1/8 x, 1/8 times x. Increased means we're going to add 20. And anytime you see the word is means equals. That's a big deal. So 1/8 x plus 20 equals 32. So now we've translated these words into an algebraic expression, so this equation. So now we're going to simply solve it. So we're going to subtract our 20 from both sides. So 1/8 x equals 12. And then we're going to multiply by the reciprocal. Remember, we never divide by fractions. So x equals 96. Now here's the temptation. A lot of students say, oh, I'm done. Box, let's go. I'm done. I'm not done. You have to interpret your answer. So your answer has to end as a sentence. So step 3 is interpret your answer. So our x was defined as the number. So that's what we're going to say. The number is 96. And that would be our final answer. Make sure you're starting with a capital letter and ending with a period. I'm not super picky about English. This is a math class after all, but there are some things like a capital first word, a period or punctuation at the end, kind of important things. All right, let's look at number 10. Andy hit 14 home runs this season. So I'm going to kind of underline things as we come across them. If this is 9 fewer than he hit last season, how many home runs did he hit last season? So our first thing is to define a variable, which means we have to know what they're asking us to do. They're asking us to find how many home runs did he hit last season. That's what they're asking us to find, which is going to help us define our variable. So because we're talking about the number of home runs, we might want to use the letter H. So this is going to be the number of home runs hit last season. And that's important to include that because we're talking about this season versus last season. So it says he hit 14 home runs this season. So we're trying to compare this season with last season. Okay, so this season he hit 14 home runs. Now this 14 is 9 fewer than he hit last season. So this 14 is going to equal the home runs he hit last season, but be 9 fewer, so minus 9. So now we have our equation. 14 equals H minus 9. So to solve this, we're going to add 9 to both sides. So 14 plus 9 is 23, and that's going to be our H. Now, we need to go back and see, it says how many home runs did he hit last season. So we're going to say Andy hit 23 home runs last season. And that would answer our question. Now we do need to check for the reasonableness of this answer. Okay, so if he hit 14 this season, we know 14 should be less, so our number that we got for the last season, that should be bigger than 14. And 23 is bigger than 14. Okay, so this is a logical answer, and it's 9 bigger, so we know that our answer is most likely on the right track. Okay, so always go back and make sure it makes sense. Some answers that wouldn't make sense are decimals and fractions. You can't hit part of a home run. Negative numbers don't make sense. A number smaller than 14 doesn't make sense here. So always think about, does this answer make sense to what's going on in that situation? All right, number 11. Mike has been saving his allowance, and then he got $25 for his birthday. He then went to the toy store and spent half his money, and now has 34 left. How much allowance money has he saved? So, first thing is, what are we trying to figure out? We are trying to figure out how much allowance money he had saved. So our variable, when we define this, we're talking about allowance money, maybe I'm going to use the letter A, or the M for money, or you can always use just X. So this is going to be the amount of allowance saved. And remember, this is money, so this is dollars. So the first thing they tell us is that Mike's been saving his allowance. So our first thing we're going to write down, of course, is an A. So that's his allowance. Then he got $25 more. So he's adding that $25 to whatever he's already saved. So that's plus 25. So he got $25, he had his allowance. He then decided to go to the toy store and he spent half of his money. Now, that's not just half of the 25, that's half of this total amount, whatever A plus 25 is. So what we're going to do is we're going to take and divide that whole amount by 2. It says now he has $34 left. So whatever's left, this is going to equal 34. So this is our equation that we've set up. So now we have to solve it. Now, we can't subtract 25 first because the whole fraction, that A plus 25, is all divided by 2. So we actually have to clear fractions in this case. So to do that, we're going to take and we're going to multiply both sides by 2. So that's going to get rid of these 2's here. We have A plus 25 equals 68. And then we're going to subtract 25 from both sides. So A equals 43. So now let's go back and answer the question. How much allowance money had he saved? Well, he had saved $43. So that's what we need to say. Mike had $43 in allowance money, or you could say he had saved $43. However you want to word it, as long as you're answering the question. So Mike had saved $43 in allowance money. Now again, checking the reasonableness of this answer. We would expect that A plus 25 is going to be more than $34. Okay, that's what he has left, so that means A has to be more. It has to be quite a bit more. We can also accept that we're probably not going to have decimals or fractions. Now we could, but maybe not ugly ones. Okay, maybe like 25 cents or 50 cents. Negative numbers would not make sense here because he wouldn't save negative money. Alright, so now number 12. I want you to try number 12. When you're ready, turn the video back on. But go ahead and pause it now and try to set up an equation. Make sure you set up a variable and answer your question in a sentence. Alright, hopefully at this point you are ready to check your answer. If you're not, go ahead and put me back on pause because I'm going to reveal the answer now. So you didn't have to define C as your variable, but I did since we were talking about cupcakes. So C is the price of each cupcake, so make sure you have done this piece right here. You should have set up some sort of variable. You should have written an equation. So I have 24C plus 16 equals 52. You again might have a different variable than C, but you should have the same equation set up. You then should have solved it and gotten 3/2 or 1.5. And then to interpret this, we're talking about the price of each cupcake. Therefore, we should say $1.50. Each cupcake Olivia ordered cost $1.50. You wouldn't say 1.5. Okay. Now, one little note. This is a pet peeve of Miss Miller's. Please don't put 150 with the $sign afterwards. Okay. Here in the U.S., we put the $sign in the front. So please make sure you're putting your $sign in the front. Don't put it at the end, please, please, please. Okay, this is a big pet peeve of mine. $signs in America go in the front. Okay, so that is the end of these notes.